The afternoon heat pressed against the corrugated walls of Fort Halcyon's maintenance bay, turning the air heavy with the scent of burned metal and motor oil. Tools clanged, engines sputtered, and a low hum from a distant radio threaded through the noise. At the far end, Sergeant Clara Vance worked quietly, tightening bolts on a battered armored Humvee. Her sleeves were rolled high enough to reveal a faint trace of ink on her wrist. Private Tyler Knox noticed it first. "Nice tattoo, ma'am," he called out, grinning wide enough for the rest to hear. "What's that? A shop logo or discount art?" Laughter filled the bay, sharp, careless, bouncing off the steel walls. Someone whistled. Another joked about her getting lost on the way to a cafe. Vance didn't answer. Instead, she wiped a line of grease from her arm, uncovering the full design. A coiled serpent wound around a compass. The ink faded and almost ghost-like from time. The laughter faltered, then stopped altogether when a shadow appeared at the doorway. A Marine colonel stood there, arms crossed, silent, eyes fixed on that tattoo. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Major Tom's Tales so you never miss these true stories of courage, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from today. Clara Vance had been stationed at Fort Halcyon for just over a year, long enough for her name to blend into the background noise of military life. 32 years old, she moved with quiet precision. No wasted motion, no raised voice, no need to prove anything to anyone. Her file labeled her as mechanical support, reassigned after a long overseas deployment. That was all anyone knew, and all she ever let them know. Every morning she arrived before dawn, the first sound in the bay the crisp click of her tool case opening. She worked without complaint or chatter. When others cracked jokes, she listened. When they argued, she walked away. Her focus never wavered. Her hands moved with an effortless rhythm that made even complex repairs look simple. To most, she was just another Marine keeping the machines running. But Sergeant Callum Briggs, who oversaw the motor pool, noticed something different. He'd served long enough to recognize posture that didn't fit a file. Vance didn't stand like a mechanic. She stood like someone trained to move under fire, balanced, deliberate, and utterly composed. He tested her once, early on. A Humvee engine had backfired so loudly, 2 recruits dropped their tools and cursed. Vance hadn't flinched. She merely looked up, steady, calm, and went straight back to work. "You've seen worse than exploding engines, haven't you, Sergeant?" Briggs joked. She gave a faint smile, one corner of her mouth lifting. "Something like that, sir." Then she kept tightening bolts, and the conversation ended there. The younger Marines never noticed what Briggs did. Fresh from training, loud and restless, they saw her as another quiet type who probably washed out of something bigger. They teased her when she didn't take the bait, called her Machine Mom or Grease Saint. The tattoo on her arm became their favorite joke. "Compass girl," Knox said once. "You lost or something?" She never replied. That silence got under their skin. They wanted a reaction she refused to give. At night, Vance returned to a small apartment off base in Greyhaven. 1 room, 1 table, and a single photograph on the wall. 1 room, 1 table, 1 photograph on the wall. 6 soldiers in full combat gear stood on a mountainside, their faces blurred by dust and time. The picture was faded, the corners worn soft. Beneath Clara Vance's wrist, the serpent and compass tattoo traced ghosts of memories she no longer dared to revisit. It had once been a symbol of pride, a mark earned only by a handful of operatives. Task Eclipse, a covert unit that existed in no database and on no record, specialized in missions that officially never happened. Recoveries, extractions, silent cleanups. 7 went into the final operation. 6 came back. Officially, none of them ever had. When it was over, the survivors were scattered, some tucked behind harmless desk jobs, others discharged in silence. Vance was given a choice: stay visible and risk exposure, or vanish into technical service. She chose the shadows. Yet muscle memory never faded. Every clang of metal in the bay kept her instincts sharp. She caught exits without thinking, tracked the rhythm of footsteps, noticed when patrols began shifting their route 10 minutes earlier the previous week. To the rest, it looked like paranoia. To her, it was survival, an instinct she couldn't turn off. Sergeant Callum Briggs saw the fatigue behind her eyes one night as the last Humvee rolled out. "You ever take a break, Vance?" he asked from the doorway. She didn't look up. Breaks are for people who forget what happens when they stop paying attention. He smiled faintly. "You talk like someone still in the fight." Her wrench clicked against the final bolt. "Some fights don't end, Sergeant. They just go quiet." He didn't press her again. Around Fort Halcyon, word spread that a new commanding officer was inbound, a man notorious for spotless inspections and zero patience for slack. Colonel Marcus Drayton. The name meant nothing to most of the motor pool, but when Vance heard it, something flickered in her eyes. A flash of recognition buried beneath control. She'd heard that voice years ago over a calm radio channel in another desert. Drayton to eclipse, extraction window closing, then static, then silence, the night everything went wrong. Now he was coming here, to this base, to her bay. For the rest of the week she stayed late, cleaning every vehicle until it gleamed. Not for inspection, for instinct, because men like Marcus Drayton never showed up without reason. If he was here, it meant something she'd buried deep was clawing its way back. At dawn that Monday, Fort Halcyon felt different, tighter, more awake. Orders snapped faster. Boots struck harder, and the kind of discipline that followed a man who remembered every face he ever commanded took hold. When Colonel Drayton finally walked through the gates, Vance didn't look up from her work, but the rhythm of her wrench slowed just slightly. She didn't need to see him to know the past she'd fought to bury was standing right behind her. His first inspection arrived without warning. No memo, no schedule, no polite heads-up from command. Just the sharp echo of boots at noon, the kind that made even veterans stand straighter. The motor pool became a scene of ordered chaos, uniforms streaked with grease, tools clattering, and the metallic tang of effort thick in the air. Sergeant Callum Briggs called the team to attention, wiping his palms across his coveralls. Clara Vance stayed beside the Humvee she'd been finishing, tightening the final bolt before stepping back. Her eyes stayed down, but her stance shifted, alert, centered, ready. Colonel Marcus Drayton moved through the rows at an unhurried pace, the way leaders do when they've spent years commanding both respect and fear. His gaze lingered on the small details: posture, precision, discipline, the readiness of tools and men. He stopped to question a corporal about protocol, gave a single nod, and continued. When he reached Vance's section, the laughter began. Private Tyler Knox leaned against the workbench with a smirk. "Guess mechanics come with souvenirs these days," he said, gesturing toward the tattoo on her arm. "You draw that yourself, or did a wrench slip?" A few chuckles followed. Briggs frowned but didn't intervene. Vance didn't move. Her wrench rested on the fender, sleeves rolled high enough to reveal the faded serpent coiled around a compass arrow. Her expression stayed calm, detached. At first, Drayton didn't react. He scanned her uniform, name patch, and the maintenance sheet beside the Humvee. Then his eyes landed on the tattoo. The air thickened, his jaw tightened. The serpent's tail circled a compass needle pointing north. Small, worn, half hidden beneath oil stains, but he recognized it instantly. His breath caught, his tone lower, rougher than before. "Where did you get that mark, Sergeant?" The laughter stopped mid-breath. Tools froze. The bay went silent. Vance's reply was soft, steady. "Old team insignia, sir, nothing official." His expression shifted, recognition mixed with disbelief. He stepped closer, voice losing its formal edge. "Dismissed," he said to the others. Nobody moved until his gaze hardened. Boots scraped, chatter died, and within seconds the bay was empty, leaving only the hum of cooling engines and two people bound by a past neither could ignore. Drayton peeled off his gloves slowly, each motion deliberate, as if he were shedding the present to uncover something buried beneath it. On his wrist, faint but unmistakable, was the same mark. The serpent and compass, scarred but intact. Vance's breath hitched once before her voice returned, quieter. "I thought everyone burned theirs." "Some of us kept reminders," he said in a low tone. "Didn't think I'd ever see another one again." His eyes scanned the hangar before he stepped closer. "This base isn't as quiet as it looks. You should know that." "I already do," she replied evenly. "That's why I stay here, out of the way." He gave a single nod, sliding his gloves back on like armor. "We'll talk later, somewhere secure." When he left, the silence he carried held more authority than his rank. That night, rumors spread through the barracks like wildfire. Whispers traded between bunks. "The colonel knows her. They've got matching tattoos. Must mean something." By lights out, the speculation turned to jokes. Someone taped a paper snake above her locker. Another left a compass drawing, pointing the wrong direction on her workbench. Vance didn't touch them. She didn't tear them down, she just kept working. By morning, the tension felt alive. Eyes followed her wherever she went. Some muttered under their breath as she passed. Others laughed quietly, thinking she couldn't hear. She always did. In the hangar, Briggs tried to cut through it. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "You've been around long enough to know better than to feed the fire." She gave a faint smile. "It's fine, Sergeant. I've handled worse noise." Still, something inside her had shifted. Her movements grew sharper, her eyes restless. Every reflection, every shadow caught her attention, and though she never showed it, Drayton's recognition had cracked something open inside her. A locked door that, for the first time in years, refused to stay closed. That afternoon, Clara Vance spotted Colonel Marcus Drayton crossing the motor pool toward headquarters. He didn't glance her way, but the air between them carried the silent weight of everything left unsaid. She knew his thoughts. If he recognized the symbol, then he remembered what it meant. And if he remembered that, the past wasn't finished with either of them. She looked down at the serpent inked into her arm. "What would you have done in her place?" the narrator asked quietly. "Walked away, or stood your ground?" Because in that fragile space between laughter and orders, Vance understood something few ever did. Sometimes the past doesn't hunt you. It simply waits for you to stop pretending you've moved on. She ignored the jokes, but her mind had shifted gears entirely. The laughter from the day before had turned to whispers, and whispers were easier to hear than jokes. Her senses sharpened, old instincts stirred beneath the surface. It began at the chow hall. Outside, she noticed a man sitting alone at a table. Too clean-cut to be a contractor, too calm to be a visitor. His posture was wrong. Shoulders squared, back straight, the kind of composure that came from training, not relaxation. A newspaper sat open in front of him, but he hadn't turned a page in 5 minutes. Vance didn't stare. She adjusted her pace, shifted her tray, and caught the faint reflection off his wristwatch. government issue, one she hadn't seen in years, assigned only to certain personnel. He didn't belong here. Across the street, a black SUV idled, its tinted windows rolled up tight. No base decals, no visible plates. It hadn't moved all morning. At first, she told herself she was overreacting. Old habits, the kind that once kept her alive. But by late afternoon, the unease hadn't faded. Back in the motor pool, Sergeant Callum Briggs noticed her scanning the perimeter more than usual. "Expecting someone, Sergeant?" he asked, voice easy but eyes searching. She shook her head. "No, sir, but tell the others to stay alert around the hangar." He paused. "Something wrong?" She hesitated. Not yet. When she turned back to her workbench, her hands stayed steady, but her gaze drifted again toward the open bay doors. The SUV was gone. Somehow, that felt worse. Later that evening, as the rest of the crew packed up, Vance stayed behind to inventory the tool cage. The space was too quiet, wrongly quiet for a base that normally hummed with motion. She moved down the rows of drawers, checking tags, counting supplies. When she reached for the socket set, her fingers brushed against paper, a folded note. She opened it slowly, her stomach tightening before she even read it. "You were supposed to stay dead." Block letters, neat, efficient. No signature, no seal, just those words. For the first time since the inspection, her composure cracked. She looked around the dim cage, nothing but shelves and shadows, yet the sensation of unseen eyes pressed in on her. Sliding the note into her pocket, she walked calmly out of the hangar, but her pulse thundered in her ears. That night, in her small Grey Haven apartment, Clara Vance locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and sat at the kitchen table with the note beside her. The serpent and compass tattoo caught the faint glow of a flickering bulb above. She traced the worn lines of ink with her fingertip. "Guess the past wasn't finished after all," she whispered. The light blinked again, off, on, then off once more. The refrigerator's hum died, leaving the room swallowed by silence. Through the stillness came a sound. Rotor blades, distant but growing closer. A dog barked sharply down the street, then fell quiet. Vance didn't move. She stayed in the dark, hand resting near the small sidearm beneath the counter. Outside, the air grew heavy with the rhythmic thump of a helicopter overhead. The windows trembled slightly. When the sound faded, she exhaled, leaning back as her pulse slowed. She knew what it meant. Surveillance, pressure, a message. Whoever had left that note wasn't simply threatening her. They were reminding her that Task Eclipse was never truly gone. For the first time in years, Sergeant Clara Vance realized silence could scream louder than gunfire. The morning sun sliced through the haze above Fort Halcyon, painting thin golden lines across the motor pool. The base moved as it always did, engines rumbling, boots echoing. But for Vance, nothing felt the same. Sleep had escaped her. The words from the note repeated in her mind until dawn. "You were supposed to stay dead. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a mistake. It was a signal, and she knew exactly the kind." By 0700 hours, she was striding across the base toward headquarters, each step deliberate and measured. The black SUV was gone, but its shadow lingered in her thoughts. When she reached Colonel Marcus Drayton's office, his aide looked up. "He's in a meeting, Sergeant." "He'll want to see me," she replied, tone calm but unyielding. Something in her eyes convinced him. A quick call, a nod, and he gestured her through. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and discipline. Drayton stood behind his desk, posture rigid, sunlight glinting off the insignia on his uniform. "Sergeant Vance," he said evenly, "you're early." "Permission to speak privately, sir?" she asked. He studied her for a moment, then waved the aide out and locked the door behind him. When they were alone, a trace of formality slipped away. "Didn't think I'd ever see that insignia again," he said quietly, nodding toward the faint tattoo on her wrist. "Neither did I, sir," she answered. He motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing. The silence between them was thick with things neither wanted to say. Drayton moved to a cabinet, opened a drawer, and retrieved a small black folder sealed with red tape. Setting it on the desk, his expression hardened. 2 years ago, Task Eclipse ceased to exist, officially at least. Reports purged, personnel reassigned. What remained was marked terminated with loss. He paused, then met her gaze. 6 of us made it out of the Hindu Kush alive. 2 died before extraction. The rest scattered. New names, new lives. You were buried deepest, Vance. Maintenance detail, low profile, off the grid. Her voice stayed even, but her knuckles whitened against her thigh. You said 6 survived. That means 4 others besides us. He nodded grimly. Harper, Intel Analysis, Fort Bragg, Jackson, Logistics, Stuttgart, Reyes, Tactical Training, Stateside, Briggs, Security Contracting in D.C. Reyes, now teaching tactical courses stateside, and Briggs, supposedly running a private security firm in D.C. Clara Vance exhaled slowly. Supposedly, she murmured. Colonel Marcus Drayton opened the folder and turned it toward her. Inside were printed photos, grainy, distant, each marked with timestamps and familiar military formatting. One showed a woman leaving a base gym, eyes scanning her surroundings. Harper. Another captured a man stepping from a vehicle near a warehouse. Jackson. The third made Vance's stomach tighten. A body on a gurney, face obscured, tagged Briggs. MIA, confirmed deceased, vehicular accident. Drayton's voice dropped. Reyes was found dead in his apartment last week. They called it a heart attack. Vance said nothing. Her mind was already moving. Angles, patterns, routes. Old instincts clicked back into place like a weapon sliding into battery. Drayton slid another image forward. A blurry satellite shot, yet clear enough to show her walking from the chow hall to the motor pool. This was taken 3 days ago. Her jaw tightened. They're hunting us. He nodded, and we're next. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of ventilation. Then Vance asked, "Any idea who's behind it?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Whoever it is, they know Eclipse's playbook. They're matching our old routes, countermeasures, even our internal language. That narrows it down," she said. "One of ours." Drayton didn't argue. Could be a leak, could be cleanup, the kind where someone erases what shouldn't have existed. Vance paced slowly around the desk, scanning the walls. "You think Command sanctioned it?" "If they had," Drayton said evenly, "we wouldn't be having this conversation." She turned toward him. "So what's the plan?" He studied her carefully, the grease-stained sleeves, calloused hands, and those steady eyes still carrying the quiet precision of a field operative. For 2 years she'd hidden in plain sight, convincing everyone she was just a mechanic. But the disguise was gone now. "First," he said, "no one knows you came here. Second, we find who's running the surveillance. Third," he paused, "we decide if we go dark again." Vance shook her head. "No, you can't hide from something that already knows where you live." He gave a grim, faint smile. "That sounds like the Vance I remember." She almost smiled back, but the weight of what they faced left no room for warmth. "You realize, if they're this deep already, it's not just Eclipse they're after. They want the files. The ones that prove we ever existed." "Exactly," Drayton said. If they wipe every trace, they don't just bury us, they rewrite history. He pushed a notepad across the desk. 5 cities were listed: Bragg, Stuttgart, San Diego, Quantico, D.C., each marked with coded abbreviations. These are our people's last known positions. We've already lost 2, that leaves 3. Vance's hand hovered over the list. You expect me to just pick one? No, he said quietly. I expect you to prepare. For the first time in 2 years, Vance stood the way she used to, shoulders squared, weight balanced, ready for orders. Her voice had hardened. Then we start with the living. Harper and Jackson. We move before the next file goes dark. Drayton reached into his drawer and pulled out a secure communicator. A matte black relic, but still reliable. Use this line only. I'll handle the cover stories. She took it without hesitation. As she turned to leave, Drayton said quietly, You know, when we pulled you off that mountain, I thought you were done. Vance paused at the door. I was, until someone decided I wasn't. Drayton nodded once. Then let's make sure they regret that. Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping dust across the base yard. Marines moved in formation, unaware of the quiet storm building just beyond their chain of command. Clara Vance walked back toward the motor pool, her mind replaying the classified folder. Faces she knew, missions she could never erase, and the faint serpent on her wrist that had suddenly become a target. That night, as she packed a small duffel, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The quiet mechanic who'd spent her days fixing engines and ignoring jokes was gone. The woman, staring back, looked sharper, colder, alive again in a way that both steadied and unsettled her. She straightened her posture. The serpent and compass tattoo glimmered faintly under the dim light. Its lines darker now, renewed. For the first time in years, she didn't feel hidden. She felt ready. The mechanic was gone. The operative had returned. That afternoon, the entire maintenance division was ordered to assemble in the central hangar for a mandatory briefing. Word spread fast. Colonel Marcus Drayton wanted every mechanic, driver, and technician there by 1400 sharp. No one knew why, but tension filled the air like static. Vance arrived early, standing near the back, hands clasped, expression unreadable. One by one, the others filed in, voices low, eyes flicking between her and the raised platform at the front. The rumor had traveled far beyond the barracks. Everyone had heard about the tattoo. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. The hangar doors stood half open, letting in stripes of sunlight that stretched across the concrete floor. Engines ticked as they cooled, and the echo of boots faded until silence took over. Then Drayton entered. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone commanded the room. Standing tall, the base flag shifting lightly behind him, clipboard tucked under one arm, he scanned the crowd before speaking. Marines, he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen more than he ever said. In light of recent events, new security protocols are being implemented across all divisions. Effective immediately, no unverified civilian personnel are permitted within the maintenance perimeter. Clearance levels will be rechecked, equipment logged and secured. Heads nodded, pens scribbled. It sounded like any other tightening of procedure. But midway through his speech he paused. His tone changed. And one more thing, he said. Setting the clipboard aside, he slowly unbuttoned his jacket. The faint rustle of fabric was the only sound. Then, deliberately, he rolled up his right sleeve. A ripple of shock moved through the hangar. Etched into the muscle of his arm was the same serpent and compass, identical in every curve and line to the mark they'd mocked days earlier. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, it gleamed like a relic of something ancient, something dangerous. The younger Marines exchanged uneasy glances. Private Tyler Knox's smirk vanished completely. The laughter that once echoed through the hangar was replaced by silence so thick it vibrated in the air. Colonel Drayton's eyes swept across the faces until they locked on Vance. "For anyone wondering," he said quietly, his tone unwavering, "that emblem belonged to one of the finest covert units this country ever fielded, a unit that operated beyond maps and outside the reach of orders. It was called Task Eclipse." He let the name linger like a ghost reborn. "Most of its members never came home," he continued, "but a few did. One of them is standing in this room." He turned fully toward Vance, and in his expression there was no command, only memory, respect, pride, shared survival. "Sergeant Clara Vance was one of its best," he said, each word deliberate. "When others fell, she kept the rest alive. That mark on her arm isn't decoration, it's survival. It's the reason I'm standing here. It's the reason some of you still get to complain about early shifts." No one moved. The silence was absolute, heavy enough to feel. Vance didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes met Drayton's, a faint nod passing between them. A silent salute to battles that could never be named. Knox's mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came. His face flushed, and he turned away. One by one, the others lowered their eyes. The serpent and compass that had once been a joke now stood resurrected as legend before them. Colonel Marcus Drayton stepped down from the platform, his boots striking the concrete with the rhythm of finality. Every pair of eyes in the hangar followed him as he crossed the floor toward Sergeant Clara Vance. The silence was so complete that even the hum of the overhead lights felt deafening. He stopped a few feet away, posture firm, eyes calm. The same man who had once commanded black operations in silence now stood before a room of stunned mechanics. His voice wasn't the clipped tone of an officer. It was the steady conviction of a Marine setting the record straight. "Every joke you've made about her tattoo," he began, scanning the room, "was aimed at a Marine who saved more lives than you'll ever count." His words hit like a shock wave. No one moved. A single wrench fell somewhere in the back, the metallic clatter sounding out of place in the stillness. "She's not here because she wanted an easy job," Drayton continued. "She's here because she's done too much, because the kind of mission she ran don't make it into the history books, and they never will." His gaze swept across the faces before him, men and women who'd smirked, whispered, and laughed days earlier. Their expressions were hollow now, stripped of arrogance. He turned back to Vance, the weight of memory heavy in his eyes. "When the mountains swallowed our team whole, she brought 3 of us back," he said quietly. "She carried a wounded man 5 miles through snow and shrapnel, then called in an airlift using a radio that shouldn't have even worked. I owe her my life, and so do many people who will never know her name." Then, without hesitation, Drayton's right hand rose sharply to his brow. The salute was crisp, deliberate, absolute. A gesture born not of rank, but of honor. The hangar froze. Even those who didn't understand the history behind it felt its gravity. Sergeant Callum Briggs swallowed hard, starting to speak, at ease, but stopped himself. He couldn't interrupt what was unfolding. Private Tyler Knox stood rigid, his earlier arrogance dissolving into guilt, eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet Vance's. The silence deepened, weighted with realization. Vance didn't move at first. Her jaw tightened, chest still. She wasn't used to recognition, not after years of choosing invisibility. Her instinct was to fade, to step back into the shadows. But this moment wasn't about comfort. It was about truth. Slowly, with quiet precision, she lifted her right hand. Her posture straightened, shoulders locked into the stance she hadn't used since Eclipse dissolved. She returned the salute. The motion was small, but it sent a ripple through the room. Every Marine in the bay, from fresh recruits to veterans, snapped to attention. The synchronized crack of boots hitting concrete echoed like thunder. Drayton held her gaze a moment longer, then lowered his hand. No further words were needed. "You'll remember this day," he said softly, turning toward the others. "Not because of me, but because now you've seen what real service looks like, what real silence costs." He walked out, jacket still off, the serpent and compass exposed for all to see, a quiet reminder that some legacies never die, even when the world tries to erase them. Vance stood there for a moment, feeling every gaze upon her. No one dared speak. The weight of mockery had shifted into something else. Respect, heavy with remorse. She turned back to her station, picked up the same wrench she'd held that morning, and resumed her work. No words, no smile, only the sound of metal turning beneath steady hands. Outside, sunlight poured across the flight line, scattering bright patterns across the tarmac. The wind carried a faint mix of jet fuel and salt from the ocean beyond. Clara Vance glanced toward the road past the base gates. The black SUV that had shadowed her the day before was gone, for now, at least. The hangar lay quiet after sunset, its heavy doors half open to let the desert air drift through. The others had left hours earlier, their laughter replaced by the gentle ticking of cooling metal. Sergeant Vance sat on the floor beside a half-repaired Humvee, its panels catching dim light from a single overhead bulb. Her fingers traced the serpent and compass ink on her wrist, following the faded lines like a map she'd long ago memorized. The mark no longer felt like a burden or a secret to hide. For the first time in years, it felt like what it was meant to be, a direction back to herself. Footsteps echoed softly behind her. Sergeant Callum Briggs emerged from the shadows, hands tucked in his pockets, expression gentler than she'd ever seen. "Didn't know you were that kind of Marine," he said quietly. She smiled faintly without looking up. "No one was supposed to." He nodded, pausing for a moment. "Well, ma'am, you've got a whole unit that won't forget again." She didn't answer, but the gratitude in her eyes said enough. Briggs gave a respectful nod before turning toward the exit, leaving her alone with the soft hum of the lights and the faint wind whispering through the open doors. For a long while, Vance simply sat there, breathing in the scent of oil and dust, and something that almost felt like peace. In the stillness, she could still hear Drayton's voice echoing in her mind, calm, steady, unwavering. "Eclipse isn't dead, it's watching." She looked out toward the horizon through the open bay doors. The night sky stretched endlessly over the distant flight line, scattered with faint stars. Her gaze fell back to the tattoo, the compass needle pointing north, the direction of purpose. A quiet reminder that even when everything fades, names, missions, recognition, what truly matters stays etched beneath the skin. Sometimes the past doesn't bury you. It waits in silence, patient and steady, until you're strong enough to carry it again. Vance rose slowly, brushing her palms against her uniform. Outside, the air smelled of fuel and salt. Somewhere out there, fragments of task Eclipse still lived. In memories, in whispers, in the kind of loyalty that doesn't fade. But tonight she felt it again, the connection, the meaning, the call. Honor isn't a medal or a title. It's how you stand when truth finds you, and how silence turns into respect when the world finally sees who you are. Some heroes never ask for recognition. They don't wear their pasts on their sleeves or talk about what they've done. They carry their stories quietly until one moment pulls everything back into the light. Sergeant Clara Vance never sought respect. She earned it, one quiet act at a time. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Major Tom's Tales for more true stories of courage and service. Because sometimes the quietest Marine in the room carries the loudest history.